walk way over yonder, see the people dressed in white. I know it was God's people, 'cause I saw them doing right. There ain't no grave.
Hello and welcome to our Back to Jerusalem Saturday morning live podcast where we take questions from you, anybody that calls. If you have a question, complaint, if you have an idea or you want to say, just make a comment, you are more than welcome to join us on this Back to Jerusalem podcast. We are super excited for all of those that have decided to join us. We are going to start off with a couple of news items and talk about what's taking place around the world. That's going to be the main focus for today in this Saturday morning podcast. So if you are listening live, let me tell you exactly what you can do if you want to call. There's a couple of ways. You can call us at, it's a U.S. number. So if you're in U.S. or Canada, this is not an international number. If you're calling from anywhere else, it will be an international number. We have the first person calling. Hello, this is Eugene Bach. We are on live with the Back to Jerusalem podcast. Who am I talking to?
This is David first.
David, hey, great to hear you. Where are you calling from?
Calling from Bar Harbor, of course.
Bar Harbor. Oh, are you the one that signed on to Dingdash?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, great. Hey, welcome aboard. Thanks for signing up on dingdash.com. I don't meet that many people from, actually, you're the first person I've ever, kind of met through through Dingdash or even on social media from Bar Harbor. It's one of my favorite places. You live in a beautiful place, sir.
I sure do, and I work at a beautiful hotel.
Oh, you do? What is the name of the hotel?
It's the Bar Harbor Inn. If you've been near the pier, it's the hotel that you kind of see along the shore path.
Oh, wow. So you work in a pretty iconic, in Hong Kong, believe it or not, in Hong Kong, whenever I'm in Hong Kong, in China, it's difficult to kind of get, if you're in the mood on a rainy, cold day for a Western soup. Asian soups are amazing. Chinese soups are great, but sometimes you just want to have a taste of home, right? In Hong Kong, we can actually buy Bar Harbor clam chowder, and it's amazing. It's so good. As soon as I saw that on the shelf, I was like, you got to be kidding me. And so, yeah, we have, I don't know where it's made. But they have, the kind of the shoreline of Bar Harbor as their logo on the front of their can. So,
That's so cool.
Yeah, how long have you been there?
I've been there here since September.
Okay, since September. And if I understand correctly, you had served on the mission field prior to being in Bar Harbor, and you wrote something about that on dingdash.com.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was working in Chad, Africa, among the Zagua people, and it's the language of the president of the country. I had been working with them since trying to remember. I think it must have been 2007, and but I've been in the country of Chad since 1992. First with Wycliffe Bible Translators, and then with the Assemblies of God.
Okay. So, what prompts you to make the phone call today?
Oh, because you have the live call-in, right?
We do.
I'm
yes.
here for the live call-in.
Okay, great. Yeah, we are always happy. I didn't know if you had like a question, concern, gripe, complaint. So we just wanted to open up the floor for you just to share anything that you might want to share. What was the first time that you heard about Back to Jerusalem? How did you hear about us?
It was through the podcast, totally.
Really? Okay. How did you find out about the podcast then?
I guess I was searching for missions-related podcasts.
Okay. Well, that's pretty interesting.
Because I'm working with, I've been sort of feeling a heart to move towards something that's that's more vocational rather than missional, an old-fashioned way, traditional missions. And so your message really resonates with me a lot as far as that goes too. Yeah.
Well, I really
sure.
appreciate, David, you calling in and just sharing with us where you're listening from and that you're one of the listeners. If I can just change gears and keep, do you have a few minutes, David?
Sure.
What led you to Chad? You said you went there with Wycliffe, but I mean, and we know that you then worked with Assemblies of God for a while. But I guess my main question is not like, how did you go, but why did you go? Like, did you have a calling? Did you grow up in Africa? What prompted
Yeah.
you to take that step? Because Chad is not one of those locations that that a lot of people want to put as their on their bucket list, that places they want to visit before they
Sure.
die.
But if they want to see every country, that's sort of the last one they'll go visit, or they'll put it on there by obligation, or maybe cross over the border from Cameroon to avoid having to live there.
Exactly.
It's very true. But the Lord placed on my heart in 1985. 1985. That's right. 1985. My parents had lived in France when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and in Kuwait when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. And while I was there, and then I came back to the United States with them, and we were in the Nashua, New Hampshire area. And during the time that we were in New Hampshire, we went to a great church, and they had youth conventions, and I was dedicating my life to Christ, just saying, Lord, whatever you want. And one day, I was listening to a sermon off of a cassette in my room in 1985, and I felt like I really heard. It's almost like I heard him say it out loud, but it was not quite out loud, so loud that I could hear it. That it was just a little lower than out loud. He said, "I want you to go to Muslims," as I was surrendering to him. Well, after having sort of an altar service after the church, after the cassette was having the altar service as well, and I heard him say, "I want you to go to Muslims," and I said, "No way." I'd been in Kuwait fairly recently at that point. Like, no, I really don't want to do that. And but then I said, "Lord, I've been surrendering. I've been saying I'll go wherever you want me to go." And he said, "No." He just kind of sealed into my heart, like I often share with people. And I know that I was called because of the fact that heart for Muslims was abiding ever since. And the Lord opened the door. First, I went through Wycliffe Bible Translators Training. My parents were getting ready to become to work in the computer department with them, but they pulled out at the last minute to go to the orientation, and I had signed up for the orientation. So they pulled back, and I ended up going on my own and became a member of Wycliffe. I think it might have been 19 years old or 20 years old, and then after that, it was just, they needed survey workers in Chad, and it was a Muslim country. Okay, I'll go to Muslim. And then the Lord just took it from there, and I ended up being there for a very long time, and still kind of have a connection with that. And I'll try to get back, like I said.
And when it comes to Chad, I mean, this is an area that has quite. I mean, from what I understand from working with partners that have focused on the Muslim regions, because it's just over half Muslim, right? I mean, it's something like 60%.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Well, yeah. When I was there, I think we were 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And
Okay.
the thing is that animist religion. But there are people that identify with that still, so that they don't kind of become Christian, wear the Christian badge. But but I think it has increased to just under half, and their neighbors are falling apart because of that mix. But I guess Chad is starting to do that too.
And when you look at Chad, I mean, they're a landlocked country. It's surrounded by some pretty dangerous players like Sudan, for instance, places where it's also equally just the misery index, I guess, is you would say is pretty high. When you say it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, what is the breakdown that you're referring to?
Oh, a 1/3 Christian. And there's going to be maybe 3/4, let's see, maybe 2/3 Catholic and 1/3 evangelical. At least that's kind of how things were when I first arrived.
Okay.
And then Muslim would be the second, third, and then the third of the three is the religion of the belief that the spirits in the mountains and the rivers have gods in them, and each village has a spirit that they claim as their own, and they have initiation of their young people and especially their boys into the spirit world, and that kind of a religion, sort of a religion that probably that the first foreigners coming to the land found when they arrived pretty much everywhere.
Okay, and so what you're saying is basically 1/3 Christian, 1/3 Muslim, 1/3 local animist religion. Is that correct?
Right.
Right. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, and during your time there, did you see an increase of Christianity, a decrease, maintaining status quo? What was the situation?
Well, when I started off, and through the years that I was there, well, from the time I started, we were really plowing on hard ground.
Okay.
But working among and then eventually, I ended up being, like I said, we're assigned to work with the Zagua to translate the Bible for them and to learn their language and to try to work in that process. And when we were there, I was excited because I had a few believers. I'm trying to. Where should I mention the name? The real name? I guess I'll just say I had one believer, but he was sort of a liar. He had a problem with lying a lot, and eventually I ended up struggling with alcoholism. And then another one definitely had a problem with alcoholism. He was, I guess, near the border with Sudan. So I was working with two. I finally had two believers, but they were very much struggling in their lives. We were trying to pour into their lives what we could to help them. And if I hear that at least one of them is doing well, but the one from near the border to Sudan ended up being in jail when I was looking for him last time, and I was working with a believer with a believer who said he's there. He wants to greet you, and but it was like, you really shouldn't go in there. And so I didn't go into the jail because, like, having a foreigner go in and see a person what that might do to his situation. But I did. He waved. He was able to go to the entrance and wave, and I waved back from the car. And so that's what I had. But recently, we're having something that's been amazing. We've had some very strong believers come forth, and one of them, both of them are on fire for Christ. One of them was unafraid to shine for Christ. And we've had this off and on, but this is the first time, and it's only historically. But at this, like last year, he was, his family hired somebody to kidnap him, and they beat him he was in the last year's Ramadan. He was being beaten, and they asked, his father called and said if he doesn't want to come back to Islam, then just then kill him. And so they beat him up really bad. They threw him in the desert, very far away from where he would ever be found. And while he was out there, he was quoting the Psalms, like Psalm 23. These people are shepherds and camel herders, and what something strange happened. The army saw the tracks of the vehicle that dropped him off, and then they saw the footprints, and they found him before he died. So He didn't die. He survived that. He had rebar wrapped around his arms and legs, and that had to be literally ripped. Had to be broken off for him to be set free.
Well, so, that has been a huge change for you to go from that environment to now being, and also, not just spiritually, but in almost every way. You've gone from one of an area that desperately needs to hear about Christ, to an area that even though you may have more secularism in Maine, you still at least have access to the gospel. And you go from a country that's close to the equator to a place that has more snow than sunshine. Maine is also one of the safest places in the U.S. It's so funny when you look at that little corner of the U.S. with New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. You kind of have those three with the lowest murder rate, crime rate, and they kind of bounce around between those three, which one has the lowest at any given time. So anyway, I'm so happy to hear from you, David. Thank you for calling. Let me ask you just a really quick question before I let you go. Have you ever read The Heavenly Man before?
The Heavenly Man, yeah, that was all. I guess that's where I might have gone into the podcast. Was I got the Heavenly Man was at my sister's house. I picked it up and read it last year. I would have been last year. Okay. And then I looked up Back to Jerusalem, found out that you had a podcast, and that's how I ended up on the podcast. Listening to a podcast. I didn't have a copy of my own.
Excellent. So since you've already read The Heavenly Man, we would like to send you another book that you probably have not read before. It's called The Underground Church. Have you heard of this book?
Oh, great. No, I haven't.
Okay, so we would like to send that to you. I'm just going to ask you to do a favor. Please send an email to info@backtojerusalem.com. INFO, so info@backtojerusalem.com. Send an email there. We have office staff that are ready to take that email, and then they will take your address, and then they will send you that book.
Well, that sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave, for calling. Appreciate it, brother. God bless you.
Okay. God bless you
Enjoy
too.
the beautiful day in Bar Harbor.
Yeah, it is beautiful. Thank you. And I'll see you when you come.
Love it when people call. Love it when you call. So thank you so much, David, for calling. It's great to talk with supporters from around the world, especially those that are in beautiful areas that I would like to one day visit. Wow, when you start looking at Chad, I mean, any of these countries that are in the 1040 window, the area between China and Jerusalem, any of those countries, you can just stop and talk about them for hours. Because of the depravity, because of the misery, because of the lack of justice. And I mean, right now, when we talk about justice, we hear about justice all over the world. I mean, it's on kind of the lips of everyone because of what we're seeing, mainly on the news with the riots that are taking place in the United States. By the way, just really quick on that note, I want to before I get into the news of the day for China, North Korea, and the other parts of the world that we'll be talking about. I want to just, I had an email that was forwarded to me from the director of Back to Jerusalem US, Pastor Al. If you've ever called in to Back to Jerusalem to our main number, you've probably had the privilege of talking to good old Pastor Al. He is one of my best friends. I absolutely love him. I look up to him. I admire him. He's got that fatherly voice that just flows like syrup over the phone. I mean, he can put you at ease so quickly. And he's got that fatherly presence that just gives command in the most graceful way to any situation. Anybody that's worried, anybody that has anxiety, anybody that's troubled, I guarantee you 5 minutes with Pastor Al and that will go away. It's just the gift that God has given him. He forwarded me a message about a new bill that is before the U.S. Congress, which I found very concerning, mainly for Chinese reasons. Anybody from China will know exactly what I'm talking about when I start talking about the data from this bill. The new Forward Act is probably the most radical legislation to ever be presented in front of the U.S. Congress. And it basically, what it does, this new Forward Act is, among other things, one of the things that it does is it basically says that no matter if you're a criminal or not, that should not impede immigration to the United States. So if you're a criminal, you're welcome to the United States. And even greater than that, it says that convictions, and this is almost verbatim, Okay, almost verbatim, it says conviction should not lead to deportation. So that means if you commit murder, rape, if you attack children, that will not lead to deportation with this new Forward Act. And this is a challenge. One of the things that the only reason I bring it up, and the only reason I was really reading it for myself, is because this is something that non-Christian countries want to see with the United States. And it's not just the United States. It's Canada, it's Western Europe. Anywhere you find Christians, non-Christians want to go there. And the reason they do is because Christian countries present opportunity. Christian countries present freedom. Christian countries present justice. Christian countries present opportunity. Christian countries present education. When you start getting into Muslim nations, Buddhist nations, communist nations, you no longer have the same level of, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse because I say this all the time, and many of you that listen to Back to Jerusalem, you hear this, you know exactly where I'm going, you know exactly my mantra here, but I only repeat it for those that have never heard, because there are people that might be listening to this podcast that have never heard our podcast before. By the way, David is one of the few people that actually found Back to Jerusalem by going through and looking for a missions podcast. So that is pretty exciting. I think the number of people like him is growing. I don't know what the situation is in the United States. Numerically, we have the most listeners, but percentage-wise, we have very few listeners in the United States. But when I start looking at other places like Pakistan, where we are topping the charts when it comes to religious podcasts. When I look at places like Indonesia, when I look at places like Egypt, we are starting to fight for the top of the charts with this missions podcast. So I don't know how many people are listening to this podcast that are new listeners, and that's why I'm kind of going back over ground that many of you older listeners, or those of you that have been listening to us for a while, you already know where I'm going to go, which is Christian nations are blessed in the way that they present things that you have across the board that make life so much better for everyone. And you don't have to be a Christian to enjoy the gifts of living in a Christian country. But if you live in a non-Christian country, the misery index begins to multiply several-fold. If you go from, and it doesn't matter, people will point out Dubai, people will point out Japan, people will point out secular places like Turkey and say, I lived there and I enjoyed it. You know, it's great in Kuwait, it's great in Japan. Yes, but I can tell you why you have those outliers. These are not the nations that set the standard. These are outliers. And you can't point to the outliers as if they're normal. They're not normal. When you get into Buddhist countries, when you get into communist countries, when you get into Muslim countries, when you get into a Hindu country, you find that life is just much more miserable than it is in a Christian country, bar none. Argument over. All you have to do is go in and live there. And if you need proof, just look at where immigrants go. Right? You don't see immigrants that are leaving from Syria and Iraq trying to stay in Dubai, trying to stay in Saudi Arabia, they speak the same language, Arabic, maybe not mother tongue, but Arabic is the main language that everybody learns. They have the same religion. They have similar cultures. They have similar foods. All life could actually be easier if those that were fleeing from war-torn areas, like those that are in Iraq, like those that are in Syria, even like those refugees that are trying to escape from Iran. When they leave, they're not looking to go to Turkey. Turkey is a middle ground. That is a bridge. They use Turkey to get, and you don't see them going east. Nobody's going to China trying to get refugee status. They're not going into Laos or North Korea. How many refugees from Syria and Iraq do you think North Korea took? How many refugees do you think wanted to go to North Korea when they escaped from the war zone in Syria? Ain't no chance. They want to go to Christian countries. And the enemy wants it that way. For me, anybody that's talked to me, I'm a libertarian when it comes to borders. I don't really care about borders. I think borders are irrelevant, except for in the real world. I wish we lived in a world where borders were not relevant. I mean, look at Western Europe. I love driving from Switzerland into Italy, into France, over to Germany. And then, taking a ferry to Sweden, taking another ferry over to Finland. I love that. You don't see any immigration officer. You don't even know you're crossing a border unless you read a sign somewhere. I wish the entire world was that way. You just go where you want to go, where you feel that love or life or economy takes you. But the world can't operate that way right now because the enemy wants to attack. And the enemy will use force and violence in order to get his foot into the door. And though I'm all about sharing the gospel with unreached people groups, I do think that there is a lesson to be learned in Lebanon. If you're not familiar with the situation in Lebanon after World War II, the French basically carved out this little piece. So basically the entire world agreed upon these two little pieces of land that could be given out of the entire Middle East. There should be a place for the Jews to have their own country and a place for Christians to have their own country. So these little bitty strips were formulated. I mean, Israel is barely a county in the United States. I mean, you can drive across Israel from one side to the other faster than you can go from one side of, San Diego County to another side of San Diego County. It's not a very big country. You can go from the west coast of Tel Aviv over to the very eastern portion of Israel to Jerusalem in no time flat. You spend more time going through the different road checks going between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem than you do actually driving on the road, or at least I do, oftentimes when I'm driving in Jerusalem or Israel. So you got this little bitty strip, and then you have Lebanon, also a little bitty strip, given over to the Christians. Guess which countries ended up having the best universities? It doesn't take a brain surgeon. During that time, the Middle East was having issues where they were fighting with one another and refugees were leaving out and they were looking for jobs and safety and education. And guess where they went? Lebanon, which was considered the Paris of the East, of the Middle East. The country was thriving. If there's a woman, I think her name is like Bridget or something. She's an amazing warrior. And she tells you about when the Muslims came in, they basically invaded through immigration. And the very thing in which they fled, they brought with them to Lebanon and demanded that the Christian Lebanese convert to Islam. So whenever you look at an immigration sheet that was just like the one that's just passed, this new Forward Act, whenever you looked at immigration like this, where conviction should not lead to deportation, the Muslim nations, and when I'm talking about Muslim nations, I'm really referring to those imams that have a big influence in those countries. They absolutely love this. They love it. They demand that the Christian nations open up their borders. Meanwhile, they keep theirs completely shut. Saudi Arabia was not bringing in refugees by the buttload like you saw in Europe. But they were encouraging it, and they were telling, as well as Turkey, and Turkey was basically almost doing some gangster stuff. Saying, oh yeah, well, if you don't do this, we're going to do this with the refugees and basically allow them to flood into your country. I will come right back to that. I'm going to just take a phone call really quick. Hello, this is Eugene Bach with Back to Jerusalem. You are on live. Who am I talking with?
This is Will, Eugene.
Hey, Will.
Eugene, you're getting harder and harder to talk to live on a Saturday morning, so I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, we just had the one call, but I wanted to. His name was David from Bar Harbor, Maine, and Bar Harbor, Maine is one of my favorite places. Have you ever been there?
I have been. We love it too. It's amazing.
It really is. That's a great place. And so when you called, he was just sharing a little bit. He now works at the Bar Harbor, the main hotel there in Bar Harbor, and he was a missionary for some time in Chad. So I was just letting him share his experience from Chad when I saw that your call was coming in. I actually don't have you down on this system, so you don't show up as as a caller. I need to save this number. But I just noticed that you are coming in from a 717 area code. So where's that from, by the way, 717?
That's still from Pennsylvania. So I didn't feel like changing my phone number whenever I moved because so many people had it. So yeah, it's been following me around the country. So that's the Pennsylvania area code.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, you moved with us and took over and started helping run our office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana when we moved from Florida to Louisiana. We moved Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and you helped us kind of get all of that started for the Back to Jerusalem office in Louisiana, and then from Louisiana, now you've started our new office in South Carolina.
Yes, that's correct.
So,
and that's faithful number has followed me all over.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I was just in the middle of talking about the new Forward Act from the United States, which actually has nothing to do with what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the. I'm going to be giving news updates from China and North Korea, which are my main focus. But I just wanted to stop here for the new Forward Act that is being pushed through Congress right now. But before I do that, I would love to ask you, because I know that we had quite a bit of activity during the time that we had our books on sale. Now, what are some of the books that we have in stock that you can share with us about?
Oh, well, right now we actually have a pretty decent supply of all of our books in stock. So if anyone goes to our store and looks at them, anything that they want is there. Our kids' books is one that we always have plenty of. Is a great one to, especially if you have kids. Our kids' books is a good one. I think the last time we talked about the Crimson Crucible, didn't we?
Yes.
That was kind of a focus one.
Yes.
And I know they're a bit dated, but we have to because it's still interesting because it talks about a lot of the history of stuff that's going on in Iraq. But we have two books that deal with Iraq and with what ISIS did when they were there. And to some people, they may appear to be a bit dated, but it's still very interesting to just read about. The one is called ISIS, the Heart of Terror, which just helps to explain like who they were and why they did all the things they did. And then the other, Genocide in the Desert, just helps us to be able to sympathize with the people and what they went through. But the cool thing about that book is the whole first half of the book is talking about the history of Iraq and the rich Christian heritage that it comes from, which I think a lot of people don't realize and don't know.
Yeah, those stories, I believe, especially when it comes to Genocide in the Desert, I wrote that book together with a brother who had been living and serving in Iraq for many years. His name was Dr. Paul, and Dr. Paul wrote the book together with me. He's the one that gathered several of the stories that we share in that book, individuals who came face to face with the death of ISIS as they rolled through Syria and Iraq. And they talk about the events that took place. And the reason why that book is, even though we might say, well, the ISIS has really been kicked out of Iraq for the most part, let me just say that what happened in Iraq was an absolute tragedy. And the world didn't really, we focused on ISIS, but the focus of the genocide is a story that needs to be retold and retold again, because the genocide basically focused on those that were not Muslim. ISIS and their ravaging of going into the different areas, yes, any Muslim that provided support for opposing police and military and government units, yes, they found themselves on the other side of ISIS fire. However, when it came to the slavery, the sex slave, when it came to the genocide of just stripping men down butt naked and then sending them out onto firing lines and basically mowing them down, this was done because they were either Yazidi, which is kind of this ancient religion in that area that's kind of a mix between Zoroastrianism and Judaism, or they were Christian. Only Yazidis and Christians were made into sex slaves and sold at a market like meat. And this is so important for us to remember, because this time will pass. And we will start to look upon ISIS as something other than the monster that it was. The reason I say that is today I think that I can probably speak for you as well, Will. You can tell me your own thoughts. But when I see the young people in the streets protesting in Western countries around the world, protesting for a great cause like standing against racism, but actually embracing the underbelly of the real movement that is pushing a lot of this, which is communism. Like if I look at Black Lives Matter, and we've already explored this in other podcasts, anybody that's listening to this can go back and listen to this podcast. But when you look at Black Lives Matter, their main focus is not to bring racial justice. Their main focus is to crash the capitalist system, and they make no bones about it. They're not trying to hide it. You can go to their homepage and you can find that they believe that Christian Western societies are patriarchal. They need to be brought down. They need to get rid of capitalism. They need to get rid of fathers in the family. And they need to embrace a communist type of setting. And they talk about raising families in communes, doing equal distribution of all resources, which is communism 101. This is why they don't, by the way, most people don't know this. Black Lives Matter does not embrace the civil rights movement of the 1960s because of voices like Martin Luther King, which was a reverend and was connected closely. Why do you think you don't see very much relationship between Reverend Jesse Jackson, even though he's not much of a reverend, in my opinion? You don't see much connection between the church and Black Lives movement. The reason why, or Black Lives Matter, the reason why is because they want to distance themselves. They are an organization that has been built up by the LGBT, 3 lesbian women who are communists, who embrace the teachings of a very communist radical from New Jersey that was a New Jersey cop killer that escaped to Cuba, that teaches Black liberation theology, which is the offshoot of communist movements in South America that tried to get South Americans away from their Catholic roots. They brought in the liberation theology, which Black Lives Matter is adopted the Black version of that, which is called Black liberation theology. The reason I bring that up is this. Most people in the West forget how evil real communism is. Why? Because we didn't really embrace the history of it. We didn't really read about the number of people, the 100 million at least number of people that died in Russia alone. The people that were killed in the killing fields by Pol Pot in Cambodia. The 70 plus million that were killed during the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution that Mao Zedong led inside of China. No monument was built for them. No museum was set up so that you could go through and remember the evilness. So what Genocide in the Desert does is Genocide in the Desert brings about the real stories of pain and suffering. Those that experienced it firsthand so that their stories could be told. The U.S. president during that time, when ISIS was building up, he would not say that their actions were genocidal. And the reason he didn't is because they didn't want to label who was being genocide, who was being killed, which was Christians being killed by Muslims. And that was not a part of the mainstream media talking points. And because it didn't fall into that category, they didn't want to talk about it. And so when you talk about Genocide in the Desert, this book, I believe, is very important for everybody to understand. And like you said, the other thing about Genocide in the Desert is that Genocide in the Desert talks about, and we do the same thing in ISIS, the Heart of Terror. We talk about how when Islam came pushing through, what was one of the first things they wanted to do? The first thing that ISIS wanted to do, priority number one, even when they were in war, their first priority was destroy history. Tear down the monuments. Tear down the statues. Dynamite those graves that had turned into living monuments. Dynamite any sign of history or relics. Why? Because the enemy doesn't want you to look back and learn from the past. The enemy wants you, he desperately wants you to forget the evil so that you will fall into the same stinking trap you did before, like a dog going back to its vomit. And when I see young people in the streets protesting and begging for an institution of communism, and according to Karl Marx, communism is inseparable from atheism. And when you talk to most of the protesters that are protesting for communism, what they often say is that they don't believe in God. And this is deadly. And our young people don't know because they haven't learned. And they haven't learned because there has been a movement in the educational institutions where liberals have basically taken over and polluted the minds of young people by ignoring and destroying and rewriting history. That's why Genocide in the Desert.
Yes.
We wanted to write it in the moment from the people that experienced it so that you, as the reader, will know firsthand. This history will be changed. I guarantee it. The history of ISIS will be rewritten. The only group that is able to maintain their notoriety, the only group that is able to remain evil for as long as they have, that everybody equally hates, are the Nazis. Everyone else somehow has gotten away with the deadly history.
Yeah. Yeah. And the amazing thing about that book, and also I'll just mention one other book real quick, is Jesus in Iran, is not only is it helping you to remember what happened and what actually took place and those who gave their lives, but it's also, these books are helping you to understand the true history of these nations, which is not Islam, but is Jesus Christ. And it shows you the rich Christian heritage that comes out of, Iraq and in Iran, and that their true heritage is founded on God. And you'd mentioned something like these people that are atheists. Anytime you begin to remove God from a nation or even from an individual's life or society or anything, you start to see the downfall of that nation. And they, even though they think they're becoming wise, they're becoming ignorant, and everything begins to crumble and fall apart. And so these books are great reminders of where those nations actually came from. And so not just remembering what ISIS did to them, not just remembering what's going on in Iran right now with the government there, but remembering what their true identity is and their true history is a very powerful tool.
Would you say that we are still in overstock mode? Because, I mean, during this year, we haven't been able to have a tour with Brother Yun. We had to cancel our tour. We don't know what the next tour is going to look like, even with our tour in the UK, which, we get supplied in the UK from our US base. So we have an overstock there. Would you say that we're still in an overstock mode, even after doing the sale that we did throughout the coronavirus time?
Yeah, we in the last 2 months, we moved an amazing amount of books. We've never sold so many books before in a 2-month period, but we still have, yes, overstock of many of our books that we have. Because we move hundreds of books every time we do a tour, and like you said, we weren't able to do that, and we are constantly having new books coming in. And so, yes, we're on overstock on almost all of our books.
Okay, so let's do another overstock sale because, I mean, it is a blessing for us to be able to get these books to our donors, our prayer partners, people that support us, people that want to learn about us. I just had a phone call from that brother that I told you about, David from Bar Harbor in Maine.
Yes.
Amazingly, he said that he learned about Back to Jerusalem and learned about this podcast from the podcast. So he actually was looking at his podcast software, I'm assuming something like YouTunes or Stitch or something like that. And he was looking for podcasts about missions and came across Back to Jerusalem. And so he started following the Back to Jerusalem podcast. And so he really doesn't have a firm grip on what Back to Jerusalem is outside of these podcasts. So I think that there may be quite a number of people like him, and we want to bless him with books. So I think that it would be good for us to let's reinstate this overstock sale. Do it for the summer. Call it the Overstock Summer Sale, where Back to Jerusalem books can be made available for people that want to purchase. What do you say?
I think that's a great idea. The only problem is that over the summer, like our office is going to be on slow. We're going to be gone for a couple weeks. We're going to keep up with our stuff, but we won't be around to stock of books and stuff. So
Okay.
maybe if we could give it a break for like a month or something and then start it back up again, would that work?
When do you come back? When are
We'll
you
be
back
back
in the
like
office?
mid-July.
Mid-July.
We'll be back
Okay.
mid-July. We'll still keep up with our work, but we're not going to be around our stock. So we're going to have people filling in for us to, like, any book orders are still going to be processed and shipped, but we won't be able to move the bulk like we normally do.
15th of July. How does that work?
That would work.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you, as our
I think-
listeners that are on our podcast right now listening live, you're the first to hear about this. The 15th of June, we will go back into the mode that we were for coronavirus.
July.
I'm sorry, 15th of July. Thank you for that. That's only 2 days away, the 15th of June. 15th of July, we will do an overstock summer sale on our books, and I think this is a great. Let's try to put together a package for children that are at home, because our children's books, I think, are some of the best books out there for children and for parents that are at home during the summertime with their children. Those that are going to the lakes, those that are going to summer houses, those that are going on vacation. We would love to provide you with these children's books, and one of them, I believe, is not enough. I mean, you can do one during a one night evening putting your kid to sleep, but we have them right now in a series, and you can get them together with the Prayer Bear, Fufu the Prayer Bear. We would love to provide those to you. Let's try to put together a package for parents as well.
Right now, we actually do. All the books are sold individually, and we also have books 1 through 3 can be bought as a package on our website right now, as well as books 1, 2, 3 with a prayer bear is another package that we have. So we've talked about other packages. We have book 6, which is just coming out. It's not in our office yet because it's somewhere out in the ocean floating over here, so it'll be several weeks yet till that's in. And when that comes, I think we're going to do like a book 1 to 6 package. So they could buy a 1 to 3 package or 1 to 6 package with or without a bear. So that's a great idea. We do have a small package already, but we'll try to get a bigger one and a better one together.
And what about books 4 and 5?
Books 4 and 5 are not in the package yet. It just was something, unfortunately, we overlooked and never got together in a package. So whenever the third book came out, we put them together in a package. And the last 2 kind of got overlooked as a 4 package. So if you have ideas of packages, let us know. We'll put together. We can put together several different packages.
All right, yeah, that sounds good. I mean, these are books, by the way, that basically what you have is you have amazing adventures for children to learn about true stories of missionaries on the field, most of them today. And they take place in China, North Korea, Tibet, Saudi Arabia. These tell true stories for children in a way that they can understand and enjoy. You also learn about different cultures, and you also learn one of the number 1 languages used in the world today, which is Chinese. Your child, without even trying, will pick up Chinese. We have articulated a way of sprinkling the language of the story with Chinese words, and you don't even know. For example, one of the characters in the book is called Shan. He's the main character. Shan lives in the mountains, a little boy who lives in the mountains. Shan, S-H-A-N, actually means mountain in Chinese. So by learning the different names of the characters, the places, the events, you're learning the Chinese language. Fei, for instance, is the name of the bird in the book. Fei is the Chinese word for fly. We do that, throughout all of these stories in the series. One of the things that I was thinking about, Will, is that it would be so great for Christian parents who would like to throw a birthday party for their child and also bless other children. You know how oftentimes parents get these little birthday packages to give out to every child that comes into the birthday party. I would love to put together a birthday package where a parent can pay like $100 or $150, and we would send them a certain number of books to give out at birthday parties for their child.
Well, listen, this is the amazing thing is because while you were talking, there's two things I want to point out. Is one, we do have a resources page just for the children's book, and that can be found on the Back to Jerusalem website. Just look at resources. Under resources, there's a tab called Fufu Kids, and that does have activities which parents can download and print out free of charge. So they don't even have to pay for that, and it has like different word searches. It has some simple Chinese languages. It has crossword puzzles and different activities, coloring pages that they can use right now if they want to for a party. But here's the cool thing. On that page, there's also this really cool map which shows and kind of tracks, the path of where these different stories take place. We are going to be printing that map, and it's going to be available in our store. And so people can buy and they can have their own map to put on their wall. So we're going to have a poster size, and we're also going to have like a little private, single page size map as well that people can have to just kind of follow where these different stories are taking place in our own personal Fufu map.
And would this map be big enough for, let's say, a Sunday school classroom to kind of put it up on the wall?
Yeah, I think if I'm thinking properly, it's somewhere around, it's not huge, but it's like 18 by 23, something like that is what the full-size one will be. So it's not huge, but it's big enough that it could be on the wall and they could point out, the different areas on the map where the stories are taking place.
So 18 by 23, that's basically almost like 1.5 by 2 feet. Almost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
So for those of you that are in Europe that use meters, basically just put your 2 feet together. That's how wide it is. Put your 2 feet together and cut one of them in half. That's how high it is. That's the height and the width. But here's the important part about that. I love this idea of the map. This map is a map of the areas where Fufu stories are coming from. So your child can look at the map and they can see this story from book 1 came from Tibet, and this is where Tibet is on the map compared to where I live. The next story from China came from here, and that's, I can see where that is in relation to Tibet. And in Saudi Arabia, I can see where that is in relation to China and where I live. The reason why that is important is because for us to share the vision of missions, it is imperative that we actually have an understanding of geography. I was so amazed when I just saw a YouTube clip. It was done for comedy, but it was so true. A guy goes out onto the street and asks people if they can pick out Minnesota on a map or Minneapolis on a map. And most people could not. And I was almost bent over with laughter, and I almost felt like that should kind of be a law in America that you're not allowed to protest an event that took place in Minneapolis unless you can actually point it out on a map. You don't even know where it took place. So when I look at the education failure, especially in places around in the West, where education is failing. And we just talked about ISIS, and we just talked about, right, one of the first things that they did is they went in and they destroyed history and relics and monuments. We're seeing the same thing today. It is important for you as a parent, if you're listening to this podcast and you have kids, you know that it is important for you to educate your child just as much as it is for your child to be educated. Your child could be educated in the hands of the wrong person. That's why inside of China today, we have mandatory moral education classrooms. So whenever B2J goes into China, we build a school for children. It is mandatory that we build an extra classroom than what is needed, because it is a classroom that its sole purpose is to teach what they call moral whatever. But it's basically the teachings of the Communist Party. And it is mandatory for you to start attending that moral classroom by the age of 3 years old. The Communist Party absolutely understands the importance of reaching the minds of children. And there's so many parents that have been okay with outsourcing the responsibility for educating their children. And then they are surprised when the children adopt a character, adopt the same ideas and belief systems of the world. because the world really does make a deposit into your children. And if you don't, there's not going to be anything in your child to make that balance.
The sad thing is,
yeah, go ahead.
The sad thing is that a lot of people take that same approach when it comes not just to the secular education, but the spiritual education, where they leave it up to the church or the Sunday school or their youth pastor or somewhere else to teach their kids about God. And if it doesn't start in the family, it's not going to work. So it's the families and their parents' responsibility to make sure that they're teaching and training their kids and just staying in tune with them and debriefing them from school. My kids go to a secular school, but we have those conversations at times, about things that they're talking about and things that they're potentially going to hear about, just so that we're on top of it. And if you have to, you have to stay on top of not just their secular education, but also their spiritual education. It's your responsibility. It's not the church's responsibility or the school's responsibility.
Yeah, and these books are a great tool. They don't substitute anything, but they're a great tool. And even if you don't have time,
back up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say, even if you don't have time to read the books to your child yourself, we do have a couple of YouTube clips that are available for free that you can just put on an iPad or a computer and then push play. And we have people that actually have sat down and read these stories for your child, and we'll take them through page by page.
Yeah, all 6 books. Book 6 isn't in the store yet, but all 6 books are in audio format. In fact, books 1 and 2 are on that page that I talked about under resources/Foo-Foo Kids, are on not just an audio, but as actually a flip through. So there's a somebody reading it and flipping through the pages and videoing it, so that child can sit down in front of their little device or whatever, the TV or their phone, and they can actually watch the story being read and flip through the story with it for the first 2 books.
Awesome. Yes, I think that those are absolutely essential. And if people are wanting to buy books and they're only listening to these podcasts and they don't know where they can buy these books that we're talking about, where can they buy them?
Go to backtojerusalem.com, and that's all spelled out, backtojerusalem.com. And at the top, there's a little bar, little store link. Click on the store, and all these books, everything we've talked about, are in that store. That's the perfect place to buy them. If you don't have access to the internet, just give us a call. We have an 800 number. It's, let me see, it's right here. It's 844-305-0566. Just call that number and tell them you're interested in buying books. You don't have access to the internet. You don't have access to our website, and you'd like to purchase books. And we take those, several times we get calls for people that want books that don't have access to the internet. So backtojerusalem.com, or just call 844-305-0566. And I also want to mention that if you're listening to this and you say, you know what, I'd really love to have those stories for my kids, or I'd really like to know more about, that genocide in the desert, or ISIS, the Heart of Terror, or Jesus in Iran, but right now we're in a financial crunch, we can't afford it, please shoot me an email. Please send me an email, office@backtojerusalem.com, office@backtojerusalem.com, and just tell me that you want our books, but you can't afford them right now, and we'll be very happy to get them out to you.
Thank you so much, brother. And if somebody was listening to this podcast by chance and said, hey, I really like the idea of having, a package of books to be able to hand out to children that are coming to my child's birthday party. I like this idea of having a birthday party special, or maybe a pool party, or a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. I don't know if I'm having that kind of party. Can we say now that they can basically just write to you before we put anything up and say, hey, I like this idea. I have 10 kids coming to my party. I have 20 kids coming to my party. Can you make me a package deal? Can they send an email to that same address, the office@backtojerusalem.com?
Yes, absolutely. Office@backtojerusalem.com. Absolutely. We will always honor, things like that. We'll, if you're looking at bulk on any book, we can give you better deals. And as we said before, like when we're on tour, we don't charge for our books. We give them out with donations. We want our books. We obviously can't just give all of our books away because it costs us a lot of money to produce them and to keep them and ship them and stuff. But anytime that we can bless people with them who can't afford to pay for them, and if you're buying in bulk for your church or for your party, whatever, please email us, office@backtojerusalem.com, and we'll work with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was good to hear your voice, brother.
Yes, likewise. Good talking with you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
When are you heading up north?
We'll be about another week.
Another week.
We'll be here about another week, a little over a week, and then we're going to be heading up north. We're actually going to be in Pennsylvania for a week or two, and then we're going to do a loop out around the Great Lakes before we head home.
Awesome. Well, brother, send my greetings to your family. It was great having you back on here.
Likewise.
All right, bless you.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
So again, office@Back to Jerusalem. I often make the mistake of saying info@Back to Jerusalem. We have somebody that will answer those emails if you send it info@Back to Jerusalem. But office@backtojerusalem.com is the best place to reach Will. And Will is the office manager for Back to Jerusalem in the United States. So he will be the one that will answer those questions for you. If you're listening to this podcast and you really want those books, I'm telling you, we can find a way to make a deal for you. Don't worry about the finances. Give us a call. Tell us your dilemma, and we will work together with you. Here's the thing, and anybody that has ever followed us or ever joined us on a tour with Back to Jerusalem, there are so many people that are blown away when they find out that we do not sell our books on tour. We give them away for donation. And if you don't have a donation, we give you the books anyway, if that's what you want. We feel, years ago, we felt that it was no longer needed for us to sell the books, that the books actually share about what is happening on the ground, shares about the persecuted church. It shares about what has been taking place in a history of a country that persecutes Christians. And we felt that that was absolutely imperative for anybody that is ready or willing to pray for the Underground House Church, wherever that might be. We found that it was absolutely imperative to get the information into their hands. And we did not want finances to be a hurdle for that to happen. We did not want people's financial situations because, for instance, we know that when we go and we speak in different forums, that there are people that just, for whatever reason, within the last week or month or day or whatever, found themselves unemployed. For whatever reasons, found themselves tackling a medical bill that they didn't anticipate. And they got responsibilities to take care of before they make any indulgent purchase like a book. I go and I speak in college campuses throughout the year. I know that those college students, I have a college student in college right now. I know that many of those college students are barely scraping by. And they would love to have the book, but they don't have the money for the book. And that's why we've chosen that if you have a desire for Back to Jerusalem books when we're on tour, come to the table and we will speak with you and give you the book. If you have a desire right now to get these books out into, like I was talking about with the children's books, into the hands of children, and you want to be able to provide these books for children that are attending some party that you're hosting or putting on, or maybe you want to give these books as a gift to other children throughout the summer as different birthday gifts, and then at the end of the year for Christmas gifts, then write to us at office@backtojerusalem.com. See what we can't do together. I really praise God for the publishers and the printing houses that God has brought beside us. You would not believe the kind of deals that we've been able to get with our partners. Whitaker House, our main publisher right now, we could easily do most of our own publishing. But we have chosen to go with Whitaker House, which is one of the largest Christian book distributors in the United States. Maybe in the world, I don't know. But the reason why we print our books with them is not because they've agreed to print our books and we've written a contract and they are able to give us some sort of royalty fees that we're happy with. No. Whenever I write any of our books, by the way, you need to know as a listener that none of the royalties comes to me as the author. 100% of the royalties, everything that we make from book sales, 100% of everything that comes in from book sales goes to ministry. Some of those books where I've done together with like Pastor Shin or Pastor Zhongrong Liang or Brother Tenzin from Leaving Buddha, there we have a percentage of the royalties that goes to the brother or sister that we wrote the book together with. But we really do focus on one thing, and that is getting the gospel into the areas that has never reached before. Now, let me just continue on with today's kind of news. Our hour is already done, and I haven't even gotten to the main points that I kind of want to talk about during this podcast. So I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm going to keep on going. Now, I know a lot of you people that download our podcast enjoy longer podcasts, especially if you have a lot of yard work to do, especially if you are going to be spending a longer session at the gym. There are several people, though, that download this podcast, and they're like, dude, I would rather you just get to the details within and make it, a 3 to 5 minute podcast. I have gotten emails of people that were absolutely irate and said, I would love to join your podcast, but I just can't get through all the stuff that you talk about before you get to the main point that you said that you were going to discuss. I'm sorry. People like it both ways. I can tell you, I don't like listening to podcasts that are 3 to 5 minutes long. So I make podcasts that kind of based on the same format that I will listen to. Right, I will listen to political podcasts, religious podcasts. I'll listen to teaching and preaching. Those are usually 45 minutes to an hour. So live broadcast, I listen to a lot of Pink Shirken recordings from Sweden. Those are kind of the podcasts that I like to listen to at least once a week from the Sunday morning services. I will listen to different churches throughout the U.S. and the U.K. for their Sunday morning services or their different teachings. I absolutely love John Piper. John Piper is one of my favorite pastors, teachers, preachers, evangelists, theologians, apologists. I really love his way of displaying information, and I love his podcasts. I also listen to secular podcasts, ones where the language isn't so good, but the content can be great, like Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan, basically, his can go from anywhere from 2 to over 3 hours. So when you listen to this podcast, usually I don't go over an hour. For this live podcast, I am going to go over an hour. I just saw that a brother by the name of Jonathan Newman just said amen. I don't know if you're saying amen as in you're listening to this or amen that I'm going over the 1 hour limit. But if you guys are staying with me, I can see that a few people are on with me live still. And I'm just going to keep on trucking and try to get through the news for the day and give you an update on what's taking place inside of China and North Korea. I'm going to kind of take a small second here and continue on with what I was talking about with this new Forward Act that was passed in the U.S. Congress. I've been watching a lot of the U.S. politics that are taking place, especially this year, right? In the year 2020, when you have the big presidential election that is taking place in the United States, and Donald Trump, the current president of the United States, is obviously a lightning rod. You either hate him or you love him. You're either on the side of absolutely abhorring him or on the side, whether you're a Christian or not, you're on the side of abhorring him or on the side of absolutely loving him. And it's the same with certain polarizing personalities also inside of Congress. And so we sit and we see individuals that Christians can easily form an opinion of. And so yesterday I put out a message on social media asking people to pray for my good friend Sam Brownback. Sam Brownback is the current religious freedom ambassador for the United States appointed by President Trump. And I've spent time with him when he was a governor. I was not with him when he was a senator, but as a senator, he was a big supporter of Brother Yun and getting Brother Yun out of prison when he was a prisoner in the 90s in China. So Ambassador Brownback has just been a longtime friend of Back to Jerusalem. He's even pushed for legislation specifically because he knew that it would benefit the Back to Jerusalem vision of the Underground House Church of China. And when I've spent time on my knees in his office together praying with him. I brought in Chinese pastors into his office and prayed together with him. This is a man that I believe really has a heart and a life mission of assisting and helping those voices that you cannot hear from the underground house church inside of China and around the world. And so one of the things that we see is that inside of China, the Chinese and the persecution that is taking place, they really do look toward, in places like Brother Yun, for instance, he really, even though he wasn't benefited, he really looked with much appreciation to governments around the world that put in an effort to be able to help him and his family during the time that he was persecuted. So when he was inside of China and his family was trapped inside of China, when we were able to smuggle them out and they were able to sneak out of inside of China, the government assistance coming from, especially in their situation, from Germany, and bringing them over to Germany and giving them refugee status so that they could have refugee status in Germany and get away from a government that basically wanted them dead. The Chinese underground house church is very appreciative for people like Sam Brownback. Sam Brownback, I got an email from his office from our good friend Tracy, who said Sam Brownback is going into a meeting with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and he's asking for us to pray for him. So I sent out a letter and I said, guys, can we please pray for Senator Brownback as he goes into conversations about Christian persecution with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. The people that are upset, you can't trust her. She's an evil. Listen, I understand your anger. I understand which side of the aisle she sits on. I understand the causes that she has taken up that has gone directly against the church. However, I also understand that I cannot dictate the way in which God works, nor can I dictate the people in which He chooses to work through. And one of the things that I see is that we have a polarization in the church that either you're one way or the other. And I just want to say that this new Forward Act is something that everybody needs to, at least if you're in the United States and you're listening to this, you need to be very careful with, because it does push for violent criminals to immigrate into the United States. And like I said, that is a big benefactor for the enemy, because the enemy wants to push. When we saw that people were leaving from the Middle East and claiming to be refugees were actually individuals who were not the most peaceful people, like those that were ISIS. And when they finally got caught in their area, or they were defeated in their area, they took off their ISIS war type of uniform and then tried to mingle in with those that the very people that they had just persecuted, and then made their way to Europe. And nations in the Middle East were paying for this to happen. Saudi Arabia wasn't taking these refugees, not for long term anyway. They built camps for show, but they never really took anybody in. And even if they did take people in, it wasn't for citizenship. They weren't going to give citizenship to refugees coming out of Syria, Iraq, or Iran. They want to push them over to Christian nations so that those Christian nations can be diluted. And then what Saudi Arabia did is take from their treasury and built mosques in these Christian countries. And they made contributions to universities that have influence in these Christian nations. They then made contributions to different political efforts in these Christian nations so that they can impact and change those Christian nations into the very nations that refugees are trying to escape from, because the misery index is so high. What I found interesting about this new Forward Act that is being pushed right now through Congress is it's being supported by 44 House members. Chinese will catch this right away. It also has 4,400 words. It's 4,400 words long. 4 is basically the sign for death. This is one of the reasons why you don't have a 4th floor in a Chinese building. And if you do have a Chinese, the only building I've ever been to in Hong Kong, for instance, that has the 4th floor is the funeral home. And the funeral home was on the 4th floor. Si sounds a lot like the word for death. Different character, same pronunciation. So it has that connotation of death. 44 congressmen supporting this bill, 4,400 words. It's probably something that needs to be looked into if you're coming from that area. That is something that I just wanted to touch on. When we're looking at China, what we are seeing inside of China, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. I want to give you an update about what's taking in China because I really feel like what's taking place is a big deal. What's taking place inside of China right now, especially with the persecution against the church, we are seeing an increase, even more than what I've been talking about for the last 2 years. I don't even know how it's possible to have an increase. I do. Sorry. I take that back. I do know how it's possible. I don't know how it's possible to see more persecution with the registered churches, and that's where we've been seeing a lot of the persecution taking place, is in the registered churches. Within the registered churches, one of the things that we're seeing is that the police are moving in quite a bit. If you go to backtojerusalem.com right now, we have an article that we just put up not too long ago. What was it, like a couple of days ago? Let me just see if I can pull that up really quick. I put up an article a couple of days ago on backtojerusalem.com about the crackdowns that's taking place. I did it a couple of days ago. It says 1 week here. Where there was a crackdown of 40 churches that were shut down, 42 churches that were shut down in the span of about 2 weeks. And one of the things that we see with these churches that were shut down is that because most of the time when I'm talking about churches that are being shut down, I'm often talking about underground house churches that are being raided. And when I'm talking about underground, it's important that you as the audience understand that I'm not discussing churches that are literally in a cave or in a basement or under the ground. I'm talking about churches that don't abide by the law, so therefore they're not registered. They're meeting in meetings that are illegal. And because they're illegal, they are considered to be house churches or underground churches, underground from legal activity. Kind of like underground black market type of activity. It's not legal. The government's not supposed to know about it. They're specifically hiding from the government of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And so we saw that there's a county. It's called Yugong County in Jiangxi Province. Jiangxi is this province kind of connected to Shanghai, very close to the Shanghai area, a very populated Han Chinese dominated province inside of China. You have this county, rural county, where it's called Yugong, where the Communist Party secretary, who's one of the highest ranking members of the government in that area of Yugong, reportedly said, and this is a quote, so I'm going to read directly from this quote. Higher echelons of government declared after an inspection that there were too many believers in the county. When so many believe in God, who will listen to the Communist Party? There is no other choice but to remove the crosses from your churches. So this is a government party official, one of the highest, the Communist Party official, said there's too many crosses, too many stinking crosses. You got to take them down. And so the reason why we got to take them down is because they represent too many Christians. And when we see too many Christians, we have to ask ourselves, are these Christians going to listen to us or to their God? And so Christianity and the rise of Christianity presents a real problem. These crosses that were up were official, from the official churches. So in the span of about 2 weeks, just recently, we saw that 42 official state-run churches were shut down completely. They were no longer allowed to operate. Yugong has, this county in Jiangxi province, has been considered to be a danger zone to the Communist Party. Currently, there are about 1 million residents that are in this Yunnan County, which is not a very popular. Anytime you hear 1 million in a country like where I'm at right now in Sweden, that's 1/8 of the population. So I'm doing this podcast right now. We're talking about 1/8 of the population just in this one county. It's not even a major city. I've never heard of Yunnan County before. I've probably been there, but I don't recognize it right off the bat. But it's got 1 million residents. And out of that, there are 300 official churches in the county. That is a lot of official churches. That does not include the underground house churches, which I guarantee you far outnumbers the number of official churches. But 300 churches, I can understand the party secretary coming through there and seeing, church crosses on so many different buildings and being like, whoa, you guys got a revival going on here? What, Billy Graham moved into town? What happened? Why are there so many crosses? These need to come down. We're a communist country. We do not allow the display of Christian teachings like that, which is represented by a cross on the front of your stinking building. Take it down. And so this has been angering the CCP because the number of Christians inside of China continues to grow. Whenever they take their hands off the wheel, the Chinese Communist Party, whenever they back off, the church grows. Whenever they persecute the church grows. The difference is when they take their hands off the wheel after they've been persecuting it, they start to come face to face with the visible representation of the church that grew while it was being persecuted. So it's kind of like this. I was persecuting you for 1 week, right? I tried to get you and let's say that my goal for this week was not persecution. My goal for this week was to get rid of I've got a very small yard in the mountains, and we get grass for maybe 2 months out of the year. So if my goal was to remove grass, and I've been putting a type of weed killer all around my yard every single day for a couple weeks, but I haven't really been looking. I can't really see that. My assumption is that the grass has been dying. But I come out one day and I say, you know what? I'm just going to let the grass go ahead and do what it's going to do. And on day one, after I say I'm going to ease up. I'm not going to put any more grass killer or weed killer on my yard. And I walk outside on day one after I've decided no more grass killer. I'm just going to kind of let it do what it's going to do. And I walk outside and I realize it's about 1.5 feet tall. That means that the weed killer that I was using wasn't really working because it didn't start growing from the day that I gave it more freedom. It had been growing all along. I just didn't see it. And that's kind of the way the church persecution works inside of China, where the government persecutes the church thinking that they're going to keep the church from growing and they'll destroy it from the inside out. But on day one of just easing up a little bit, they start to come face to face with signs that are significant, that it didn't just start growing on the day that they stopped, but it's been growing the entire time. They have evidence that in spite of the persecution that they've been investing in, the church grew anyway. So we see these churches where right now 300 churches in a county of 1 million people exist. But in Yunnan County alone, it's thought that the Christian population could be 1/4 up to 1/3 of the population. That's insane! And these aren't normal Christians. These are radical Christians that had to become Christian while under persecution. They didn't become Christian because they thought it would get them a job. They didn't become Christian because they thought it would give them more likes on Facebook. They didn't become a Christian because they thought it would get them promoted in their current job. They became a Christian in spite of the fact that it could bring them and their family and their children harm for the long term. Unfortunately, in this area, we've also seen that certain churches have had their crosses taken down inside and replaced with pictures of Mao Zedong and President Xi Jinping, which is sad. But it doesn't stop there. We've also seen an increase of persecution in Xiamen, where we actually put up a video of a raid that took place a while ago. But now I just saw a post from another brother. I think we want to try to do a report on this more full tomorrow, where we see police that have been brought out, marched in military style. And their focus, this is like a church crackdown task force that has been formed to fully focus on persecuting Christians. Now, I have a military background. This was at least a company size operation. A company size of 3 infantry platoons, a weapons platoon, and an admin section. I mean, I was looking at the number of people there in uniform marching as if they were a company military unit. This was a task force to go through the city, Xiamen, and clean house, persecuting against the Christians inside of China. This has been a difficult season. Now, I know that there are some people that are listening to this podcast, or you might have friends that there might be people that are listening to this podcast right now, and you're like, you know what? I have friends that feel that what they're seeing inside of China is the same as what we're now seeing on the streets inside of the United States. That the people inside of the United States are protesting for freedom, just like the people in Hong Kong are protesting for freedom. You need to stop that in its tracks ASAP. I saw a Christian article that had been written, and I blew a lid because I was so angry at the stupidity of the Christian author who wrote that there are similarities between those that are protesting inside of Hong Kong and those that are protesting inside the United States. What a moron! Because the protest could not be more opposite. On one side, like what we're seeing inside of Hong Kong, there are people that are freaking out. They do not want the Communist Party to rule over their lives. And they're willing to give their lives to fight against a communist takeover of their city. They've been free for so many years. They have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press. They have all freedom of gathering together, freedom of protesting. The protesting that they're doing inside of Hong Kong right now is not legal inside of China. You get the tar beat out of you inside of China. You even think about. You know what happens if you try to do a protest like you see in Hong Kong inside China? You get a tank pulled out like we see in the protests that were basically all over the screens of everywhere except for China. Most Chinese don't know what June 4th Tiananmen Square incident's about at all. Zero. And I'm not going to go deep into that. For several different reasons. I'm just going to tell you that there is nothing even similar, because when you look at the protests that have been taking place in the West, they actually are crying out for equal distribution of wealth and communism. Look at the graffiti that you're seeing spray painted on churches, monuments, walls, city buildings. The looting that's taking place. The graffiti is the sickle and hammer. The sickle and hammer, or you see the fist being raised up. That is the fist of revolution that is commonly used for communism. The two sides are protesting for the exact opposite. So don't try to compare the two. This is good for you to know. I'm coming from China in a Chinese perspective. I can tell you that those that are protesting inside of Hong Kong do not want communism. They know what it's selling, and they're not buying it. Whereas those that are in the West, they've been living in freedom for so long, they don't know what communism is all about. They don't know what it's like to live in an atheist society without God. And so when you see right now, the Chinese government's absolutely loving the protests in the West. Loving them. And they are trolling the President Trump like nobody's business, because President Trump supported the protesters in Hong Kong. And he had much to say about it. So now you see the leadership inside of China that are writing to the US, and they're like, look who's going and hiding in their bunker hideout because of the protest. The democratic society should let the protest carry on. Look who's bringing down the military to stop these protests. Why do you want to stop democratic, peaceful protesters? They're trolling the president. But here's the challenge. Anybody listening to this podcast in a Christian country, go into Twitter right now. Follow who you like, say what you like. You can do that. Now, go to China, Iran. Go onto Twitter. Sign on. See how far you get. See if you can even get onto the platform. Chinese government is allowed on Twitter, but the Chinese people are not. It's a big difference. And China does it for the safety of their people. When you ask them, well, why aren't they allowed to have freedom of religion? The response you'll get is they do have freedom of religion. We have freedom of religion embedded in the Chinese Constitution. But we also have to make sure that it's safe for the people. Don't you love it when governments do things for the safety of their own people? We have to keep the people safe. We have to do things for their own good. Sometimes people are too stupid to know what they really want. Sometimes people are too stupid. If you let them go free, they'll do all kinds of bad things. So we have to take care of them. We have to make a little fence, a little box for them to play in. And they're not allowed outside of that box. And if they try to leave the box, then they get punished. We see the same thing with Iran. Iran is trolling the United States right now also with the protesters. They're loving it. But try to go on to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Iran. It's pretty interesting right now because in the protesting areas in the West, and it's not just America, that's why I keep saying the Christian West, because we're seeing these kind of protests in London, we're seeing these kind of protests in mainland Europe, we're seeing these protests in many different areas where people have more freedoms. And they're embracing the communism, and there's communist elements in the underbelly that are pushing the protesters further than they want to go. Most protesters are good, right? Most protesters are like, we want justice. We want racial justice. And dude, I'm on board with you for that. Absolutely. This is what the Bible declares. All of us are created equal. None of us are in a position to treat others bad based on race. At any point, time, or place. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. This is biblical teaching. But if you think you're going to get lack of racism, if you think you're going to get racial justice through communism or Islam, you're a moron. You haven't read the first book about the rise of communism and what it does, or the rise of Islam and what it does. Have you read anything about the jihad that took place through Africa? You want to know why a lot of the great history of Africa has been lost, especially as it pertains to Christianity? The great civilizations, the ingenuity and the great thinking, the writing that came from one of the greatest libraries in the world is in Africa. Was Alexandria. Completely destroyed during the jihad. When the Muslims moved in and they took over, why do you think that there is a completely different looking demographic in Egypt today than there was before? Of course, Greece and Rome had something to do with that, but not to the point of what the Muslims did from the Arab Peninsula. I've been working in Sudan for the last 15 years. When the Sudanese in the south and in the Nuba Mountains were being attacked by the Arab Muslims, they were like, dude, we're Muslims as well. We're all Muslims here. Why are you attacking us? one of the greatest slave traders of trading, buying and selling of slaves, it takes place today in Africa. And a lot of the customers are Muslim. And you have Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is founded by 3 lesbian women who want to take fathers out of the home, who want to bring about communism and crash the capitalistic system. Black Lives Matter, you are going to team up with communism and Islam. You're going to team up with the radical Black Islamic movement to push the agenda. Did you not hear anything from Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, when he came to speak at Columbia University in 2015, and somebody had the guts to ask him, excuse me, what is the situation for homosexuals in Iran? Do you remember his response? 2015, Ahmadinejad, Columbia University. Does anybody listening remember his response? We don't have homosexuals in Iran. And the crowd laughed because they thought he was joking. Without even breaking a sweat, without even breaking a smile, without grinning, without even acknowledging that there was laughter in the audience. He said, no, really. We do not have homosexuals in Iran. You know what they do to homosexuals in most Muslim countries? Many Muslim countries. I won't say most, many. Several. They get treated pretty badly. Thrown off buildings. Killed. Executed. So think about that when you're looking for partners to do movements with. And we are seeing that right now inside of China with this big kind of feeling, as well as in places like Iran, this enjoyment of watching the world fall apart in the Christian West. We are also seeing right now a big challenge with Chinese, or especially our partners that are supposed to be going back to China. So we have several Chinese that have been serving in the mission field. They need to go back to China for one reason or the other. And at the moment, it's almost impossible. It's very, very difficult. The Chinese government doesn't want their people to return back. They got them in this diaspora mode. In fact, I just read an article today, you can look this up. There are at least 1,000 Chinese trapped at sea that have been working on Chinese cruise ships. Chinese cruise ships are pretty big for Chinese patrons, especially those that like to gamble. Those that like to gamble, I myself worked on a Chinese cruise ship. I worked on a Chinese cruise ship called Star Cruises. I worked on the Pisces and the Leo. It's two different ships that they have that come through Hong Kong and they go to Xiamen. And so I worked on both of those. And the reason I worked on there is because I was friends with the religious kind of ambassador that arranged for religious services. So if you're not familiar with cruise ships, a lot of times the people that come and work on the cruise ships, they work 7 days a week, many of them 12 hours a day. So they don't get a day off. But what they do is they work in segments throughout the year. So they'll do like 6 months on, 6 months off, 9 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on, 9 months off, that kind of schedule. So, and they often work for tips because they can make a lot of money in tips in a very short amount of time that will basically last them throughout the year. So what I would do is I would go on these Chinese ships and I would minister to these workers, these staff members. And what we would do is we would have church at midnight to 2 o'clock in the morning because the captain of the ship did not want any religious service to interfere with the functioning of the ship, especially as it pertains to gambling. And so they didn't want any religious service to interfere with those that were involved in the gambling section of the ship, because that's where the ship makes all of their money. Well, right now we have over 1,000 of those workers on Chinese ships that are not allowed to return back to China. China, their own country, they can't return back. It's a really big challenge that they have right now. Now, there is a very special section that's taking place inside of China right now. And I want to dedicate that to a special podcast. So I'm not going to do it in this podcast. I was going to do it in this podcast, but because of the shortness of time, I'm going to put this onto another. I'm going to do an entire podcast just on this. Because in Wuhan, with the coronavirus right now, Wuhan has been the epicenter. But there's something about Wuhan that you may not know. It's also the epicenter for something else. And that is organ transplants. I'm going to do a special podcast on that later on this week. I encourage you to come back to Jerusalem and listen to this special podcast that we have for the organ transplant industry that's been taking place inside China and what that has to do with Wuhan. Because there's more shady things happening in Wuhan than just the coronavirus and the laboratory that I've talked about several times. One of the things that I want to touch on really quick when it comes to news inside of China is something that impacts us all. Something that impacts all. This also is its own podcast. This is a massive subject. It is, if you want to know what the number one, people that are listening to this podcast right now, if you want to know what can we pray about for the Back to Jerusalem Chinese Church, what can we pray about, I'm about ready to tell you the number one thing that we need prayer for. This is the number one thing, the number one threat of missions around the world. The number one threat of missions around the world is not the Chinese Communist Party. The threat that I'm about to mention is bigger than that. The number one threat is not Islam for Christianity. The number one threat to Christianity and Christian missions is not Islam. The number one threat to Christianity and to the world of missions is not nations that persecute believers. It's not China. It's not Iran. It's not Somalia. It's not Sudan. It's not India. It's not North Korea. The number one threat to Christians and Christian missions is banking. Banking has become the number one threat, and Christian missions are running out of options. We have a noose around our neck that is slowly tightening more and more. Right now, we have a choking point that many churches have already reached. Many churches, many mission organizations have already shut their door because they are no longer allowed to do the work that they were called to do because a bank told them, "We will shut down your account if you continue." And there's no way to open up another account. And if you open up at another bank, the other bank will tell you the exact same. We've been fighting this battle for a couple of years. It's an uphill battle. It takes more time, more effort, more energy than almost any other thing that we face. We've been kicked out of bank accounts in Europe, bank accounts in Asia. One of our biggest supporters who's been supporting projects inside of North Korea for years has mainly been taking money in cash from Switzerland. He's no longer able to do that. He's no longer able to take the cash out of the banks because now if you take out large amounts of cash, as we have been doing for many years, one of the reasons why Hong Kong has just been a banking hub for so many mission organizations is because you can basically walk in and grab $100,000, no questions asked. Hong Kong had the freest, most open banking center in the world. Now, I give you this challenge. As an American, travel to Hong Kong. Try to open up a business account or a personal account. See how far you get. You'll be stopped so fast. I'm in Sweden right now. I'm Swedish. I have a Swedish passport. I'm a Swedish citizen. But I don't live in Sweden. I don't have the identification for living in Sweden. I don't pay Swedish taxes. It's one of the beautiful things about being Swedish, is that if you are Swedish and you live in another country, you don't have to be a part of the Swedish tax system. But no matter where you are in the world, if you're an American, the Americans want their taxes. So if you're an American and you've lived in China and you haven't set foot in America for 20 years, doesn't matter, Jack. Uncle Sam wants his cut. So you have to file your taxes. Sweden has a really interesting system here. You can opt out of paying into the system, but you can't benefit from the system. You can't benefit like people that pay into it. Makes sense to me. It's fair. So for instance, if I go to the hospital, if I go to a clinic, even though I'm a Swedish citizen and they have government health care here, I have to pay in cash, or I have to pay, in cash or by credit card for the services rendered. It's not taken care of by the government because I'm not in the system. I'm not in the tax system. I'm a citizen, yes. Swedish, yes. Passport, yes. And if I want to move here, I can then join the tax system. Yes, no problem. But you cannot benefit from a system that you're not paying into. Oddly enough, though, I have it almost next to impossible to open up a bank account right now. Opening up a bank account inside of Sweden is very, very difficult, even as a citizen. Anybody that takes out $10,000 or deposits $10,000 into an account in cash into a U.S. account, you're going to get some questions. Now in Hong Kong, we're seeing the HSBC, one of the largest banks in the world. HSBC, it's a shortening for Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. HSBC is like I said, one of the largest banks in the world. They've just come out and publicly aligned themselves with China. They have publicly backed the Chinese national security legislation and made it very clear which side they stand on. My friend that I was talking about from Switzerland that tried to take money out, he used to be able to carry it from cash, used to be able to take out cash from Switzerland and carry it into North Korea, can no longer do that. So then he's been sending money via South Korea into a bank account there. But then he got information from his bank that said, if you send money to South Korea, we need to see exactly what it's going for, because if we even assume, this is a bank, they said if we even assume that it's being used for North Korea, we're kicking you out of our bank. And they'll do it. We've been kicked out of banks in Switzerland for the same reason. We had some Christian donor that kept putting on their donation, this is for North Korea, this is for Iran. Those nations have sanctions against them. A bank in Switzerland could not receive financing knowing that they were receiving transfers for the purpose of Iran and North Korea. We told our donors, please don't write that on your donation. They did it anyway. Not knowingly, of course. They did it by accident. But those accidents did not keep us from getting kicked out of our banks in Switzerland. Same in China. We've been kicked out of banks inside of China. And what happens is, the more banks you get kicked out of, the harder it is to open up another bank account. When you open up a bank account, you have to answer a lot of questions. You have to submit a lot of data. Before, when I would take out $100,000, $200,000 US dollars, or even more, I would take it out US dollars in cash. If somebody asked me, what do you need the money for? I ain't telling you, it's my money. I'm taking it out because I feel like it. What's it matter to you? I'm going to go home and sit in an empty bathtub and sprinkle my naked body with all of this cash. It's none of your business what I do with this cash. But today, they demand an explanation for every penny that comes out and goes in. They don't only want to know where the money's going, they want to know, where did the money come from? Receipts. Oh, I'm telling you, working in closed nations. That's why so many partners that I know of have shut their doors in India, shut down their operations in China, because banking is no longer on the side of Christians. You can no longer tell a bank, well, we're doing Christian missions. They don't care. If you don't tell us exactly what it's going for, and if we don't like what it's going for, we shut you down. And without that, you have no way of operating, because most people don't even want to take cash anymore. I can't even use cash in many places here in Sweden. Because of the coronavirus, people don't want to handle it. So you either have to use Swish or credit card. Swish is like a phone system that they use here in Sweden. Those are the only two ways. In some places, there's a local farmer's cheese market. I really love to go there to buy cheese. Can't buy for them anymore because they can only take Swish. This is really, really difficult for ministries around the world. This is the number one challenge hitting us on the mission field today, and we desperately need your prayer. So that is the news for today for China. Now let me just touch a little bit on North Korea before I let you go. Before we wrap this podcast up, I do want to give you an update from North Korea, because I've been getting text messages from inside the country, from inside our team inside of North Korea. And our team inside of North Korea is asking us to continue to pray. At the moment, North Korea is still on lockdown because of the coronavirus. So we're seeing kind of a lockdown, kind of not a lockdown. It's an interesting situation as it pertains to Pyongyang. Inside of Pyongyang, one of the things that our team is telling us that we're seeing a lot of right now inside of Pyongyang is a lot of construction. So right now there's a lot of construction. We tend to think that it has to do with the 75th Communist Party birthday anniversary celebration that will be taking place in October of this year. So they're kind of getting ready for that. One of their big projects, right in the center, middle of town, is the Pyongyang New Hospital. And this is kind of this massive site. It's basically got 2 towers on each side. Actually, if you turn the hospital upside down, it would look like a gun. So you got these 2 towers sticking out on one end, and those go up several stories. I don't know how many stories, but let's say 20. And then the rest of the building kind of sticks out, and it's like 3-4 stories above ground. And so you got this long flat area, and then at the end these 2 massive, which, I mean, the only thing I want to know is that if I'm sick, don't let me go to one of those towers. Because the last thing I want to do is to be on one of those towers when the electricity goes out, as it always does, and I'm in the middle of needing a surgery, and my surgeon is on level 1, and I'm on level 20, waiting for my surgery, or waiting to be taken down to my surgery, and the electricity goes out, and there's no elevator for people to bring me up and down. Or I may be in recovery, and there's no elevator going up and down. And so, good luck on doing a push button for a nurse to come and help you out when you need help. So this is a big kind of a project that's kind of taking, but there's several projects that are taking place around the center parade ground. And the reason why these are taking place around the parade ground, I believe, is because of the anniversary, the 75th anniversary, which is a big deal, that's going to be taking place in October of this year. Wish I could be there. I would love to be there. I don't think I'll be able to travel into North Korea by that time. I hope I'll be able to travel just into China by October. I have a feeling, though. I have a suspicious feeling. Call me crazy, but I have a feeling that the coronavirus pandemic is probably going to calm down after the November U.S. elections. It's just my thinking. Anyway. Enough on that. Interestingly enough, with all of the construction work that is taking place around all of North Korea, one of the things that you see is that there is this huge, unfinished 7-star hotel called the Yongwon Hotel that was supposed to be finished. It's not done. It's kind of this eyesore that's right there in the middle of downtown Pyongyang. It was backed by a Chinese investor, but it was stopped. It wasn't completed, and it's still not being worked on at all. I've been a part of so many of those projects and witnessed so many of those projects where Chinese investors come in, dump a buttload of money into North Korea thinking that they're going to get some sort of special permission to be able to operate, and then all hell breaks loose, and the Chinese realize that, wow, I'm not going to be able to make any money here. I'm going to lose a lot of money. I better get out while the getting's good. And they leave these unfinished projects there. That hotel, which could have been an amazing facility to host tourists, still sitting. So even with all the construction taking place inside North Korea, nothing is happening there. But our team is asking us for prayer. I can't give them any details. I can't even allude to some of the details in the prayer, just because this is not a safe forum for me to, share a lot of things about. But we have a team inside of North Korea that is asking for prayer. Their projects have been on the verge of shutdown for several months. And they've been operating by grace, and they're still operating. But their days are numbered. We're always one day away from closing that project down. Always one day away. But because of your prayers, we haven't had to. Because of people like you that are listening to this podcast, that are praying together with Back to Jerusalem, I believe that project is still going. And I want to thank you for your prayers. And I'm going to end with this podcast with this. This is a live podcast. I can see that people are still listening. I'm going to end with this. We need your help. You can help us right now. You can help us right now, whether you've ever donated to Back to Jerusalem or not. You see, right now we have a platform that's called Dingdash. At dingdash.com, we have Christians from around the world that are signing on. Now, some of those Christians have alternative platforms that they could go to. They can go to Facebook, they can go to YouTube, they can go to Instagram or Twitter. But they've chosen, for whatever reason, to go to Dingdash. And I'm very, very thankful for that. However, we have believers from around the world, from India, Vietnam, Cambodia, signing on to Dingdash. I'm going to ask you, as a listener, as a prayer partner, please consider signing on. You go to dingdash.com, Dingdash, Dingdash. The reason we call it Dingdash is because during World War II, it was very difficult for people to communicate, or during the World War, it was very difficult for people to communicate with one another in friendly waters. So a series of dings and dashes known as Morse code was used for people to communicate, especially nautical vessels. And that the series of dings and dashes could be used to send information in the middle of enemy territory. Dingdash.com allows Christians in closed countries that are not able to gain access to Facebook, that are not able to get access to Instagram. They're able to get onto Dingdash.com, and when they come onto Dingdash.com, we need help from believers like you to encourage them, friend them, follow them, pray for them. We're going to be starting a marketplace, hopefully sometime this year, on Dingdash.com that will allow believers in closed countries will be able to bring their needs directly to you. And as a prayer partner on Dingdash, you can actually support them and help them. We would be, as Back to Jerusalem, we'd be completely removed from the process. So we wouldn't have any investments whatsoever on either side. We just want to facilitate. Most ministries might consider this to be suicide. But that's kind of a problem, isn't it? If you're involved in a ministry that needs to manufacture a crisis in order to be legitimate, you're in the wrong ministry. If you're in a ministry where you believe that you need to hide details so that you can extract funds from one believer and get them to another, you're in the wrong ministry. My hope, my dream, my prayer is to one day be out of a job. Right now, my focus is preaching the gospel to all those that have never heard. I hope I see a day where everybody has heard the gospel at least once. I'm not going to try to manufacture a group of people that have never heard the gospel just because I want support for ministry. We have so many people that are signing on to Dingdash, and they need your help. They need your support. They need your prayer. They're being persecuted. They're living in countries where the misery index is out of control. It's through the roof. And your kind word, your kind post, your on dingdash.com, we have something a little bit different than all other social mediums, where we actually have a little button you can click and it gives prayer hands. So you can show people just by clicking on their status that you're praying for them. So would you consider signing on today and joining us at dingdash.com? www.dingdash.com. Create a free account today and tell a believer in a closed country you're thinking of them. You're praying of them. Now keep in mind, many of them are persecuted. Keep in mind that many of them don't want to share information, so they're a bit concerned in the beginning. So it might feel like you're on dingdash.com all by yourself, but I promise you, you're not. Also, if you get the inclination, we would be extremely grateful if you happen to move over to youtube.com, to our YouTube channel, the Back to Jerusalem YouTube channel. Hit the like button. Follow us on YouTube. That would be a huge blessing for us. Thank you so much for joining us again for another Saturday morning call-in podcast, where we are coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of Sweden. God bless you guys.
Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. Well, go down yonder, Gabriel. Put your foot on the land and sea. But Gabriel, don't you blow that trumpet till you hear from me. Well, look way